Although genetics is often seen as one of the most objective sciences because it's rooted in biology, history shows that scientific ideas can be skewed by the social and political world around them. For much of its history, genetics and genetic ideas were shaped by scientists and policymakers working within societies structured by racial hierarchy. As a result, biased assumptions about race became embedded in scientific theories and public understandings of our identities. In Los Angeles, eugenic beliefs and social Darwinism were weaponized, influencing education, labor systems, and the way people understood heredity, shaping how race and human difference were interpreted for decades. Even though these ideas no longer exist within education systems, their influence still lingers in the way people think about race and genetics today. This legacy of racism has had lasting impacts on Los Angeles' diverse communities. In response to this legacy, organizations like the UCLA Clinical and Translational Science Institute work in Los Angeles to challenge misconceptions about genetic science through inclusive research, education, and community outreach that aim to make science more accurate and more responsible to the communities it affects. In Racism and Science, a perspective from gene therapy, Janine Schofield demonstrates that racism in genetic science remains present today through the underrepresentation of Black scientists and leaders in gene therapy research. This makes the UCLA Clinical and Translational Science Institute an important stakeholder in this issue because it actively works to increase diversity and equitable participation in genetic and medical research throughout Los Angeles. Schofield argues that racial disparities remain present within gene therapy research and scientific leadership. Fixing this issue is not simply a matter of promoting diversity for its own sake. Historically, genetic research has been dominated by a narrow demographic, whose conscious and unconscious biases can influence the questions asked, methods used, and conclusions drawn. While there are objective differences within and between populations, scientific findings can be interpreted in ways that reinforce pre-existing beliefs about race and human relationships. The continued underrepresentation of Black researchers suggests that historical inequalities still shape modern scientific institutions. By expanding representation among both researchers and participants, UCLA CTSI helps reduce bias and improve quality of scientific knowledge. Its work reflects a broader effort to ensure that genetic science serves diverse communities rather than reproducing inequalities that have historically shaped the field. In Addressing Racism in Human Genetics and Genomics Education, Professor Julia Svoboda Govea demonstrates that genetics education can either challenge or reinforce racial misconceptions. This connects directly to UCLA CTSI because the organization promotes public education and community engagement surrounding genetics and health research in Los Angeles. Govea argues that genetics education can either challenge racial misconceptions or reinforce them. Throughout the 20th century, educational programs involving heredity, family planning, and human behavior were often influenced by eugenic ideas that portrayed social differences as the result of biological inheritance. Although modern genetics has shown that human genetic variation is far more complex than traditional racial categories suggest, many of these assumptions continue to shape public understanding today. Govea warns that simply presenting scientific information is not enough to correct these misconceptions. When educators fail to directly address common misunderstandings about race and genetics, students may continue interpreting new information through outdated beliefs about biological difference. This challenge helps explain the importance of UCLA CTSI's work. By improving genomics literacy, the organization helps people critically evaluate genetic claims and understand the relationship between genes, environment, and society. In doing so, it works to address historical misconceptions that have long been used to justify racial inequality. In Eugenics, Sex, and Family Life Education and Juvenile Delinquency in Los Angeles County, California, Julia B. Hager's research shows how eugenic ideas became embedded in Los Angeles public education. This identifies the Los Angeles Board of Education as a key stakeholder because schools played a major role in shaping public understanding of genetics and heredity. Hager examines how eugenic ideas influenced sex and family life education in Los Angeles County during the 1940s. Rather than remaining confined to scientific discussions, these beliefs became part of everyday education. Students were taught that certain family structures, behaviors, and personal traits were more desirable than others, often through a framework that linked social outcomes to heredity. In this way, schools helped transform scientific claims about genetics into social expectations about who is considered fit to contribute to society. This history demonstrates how educational institutions can reinforce racial hierarchies when scientific ideas are presented without critical examination. It also helps explain why modern organizations such as UCLA CTSI emphasize accurate and inclusive genetics education. If misconceptions about heredity were once spread through public institutions, correcting them requires institutions that actively promote a more evidence-based understanding of human genetics. Mike Davis's Sunshine in the Open Shop, Ford and Darwin in 1920s Los Angeles demonstrates that eugenic and social Darwinist ideas were used to justify racial and economic inequality in Los Angeles workplaces. This makes organizations such as the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce and the Merchants and Manufacturers Association important stakeholders because they help to translate biased scientific ideas into economic policy. Davis argues that social Darwinist and eugenic thinking extended far beyond science and education into the economic systems of 1920s Los Angeles. Industrial leaders promoted the belief that social and economic inequality was a natural result of biological differences rather than discrimination or unequal opportunity. By framing success and failure as evidence of genetic fitness, these ideas helped justify the placement of Mexican, Black, immigrant, and working-class laborers into lower-paying and more physically demanding jobs. This history demonstrates how concepts associated with genetics can influence society far beyond scientific institutions. Rather than challenging inequality, genetic ideas were used to legitimize it. The work of the UCLA Clinical and Translational Science Institute stands in contrast to this legacy by promoting inclusive and evidence-based approaches to genetic research that seek to reduce, rather than justify, social disparities. UCLA CTSI's interest in racism and genetic science is promoting inclusive, evidence-based research that reduces bias and improves health equity in Los Angeles communities. As genetic science continues to influence medicine and public health, UCLA CTSI has a strong interest in ensuring that research reflects the diversity of the populations it serves. Historical inequalities in scientific research have often excluded marginalized groups, resulting in gaps in knowledge and unequal access to medical advances. By encouraging diverse participation in research, CTSI works to improve both the accuracy and fairness of genetic science. This interest directly relates to the documentary's thesis because it addresses the ways that genetic science has historically been shaped by racial bias. Rather than treating science as automatically objective, CTSI recognizes that outcomes can be influenced by who participates, who conducts studies, and whose experiments are represented in scientific knowledge. The UCLA Brain Research Institute is interested in ensuring that neuroscience and genetic research are accurate, ethical, and representative of diverse populations. The UCLA Brain Research Institute contributes to research and education that shape public understanding of genetics and human biology. Because misconceptions about biological differences have historically been used to justify racial inequality, the Institute has an interest in promoting research that accurately reflects human diversity and avoids reinforcing outdated assumptions about race. This connects to the documentary's thesis because it demonstrates that modern scientific institutions have a responsibility to learn from the history of racism in science. By supporting ethical and inclusive research practices, the Brain Research Institute helps ensure that advances in genetics and neuroscience are used to expand knowledge rather than reproduce historical biases. The Los Angeles Board of Education has an interest in preventing genetics education from reinforcing racial bias, given its involvement with family life education programs that incorporated eugenic ideas in the 1940s. Historical evidence shows that Los Angeles schools once played a role in spreading eugenic ideas through educational programs that focused on heredity, family life, and social behavior. These lessons often presented social differences as the result of biological inheritance, helping to normalize misconceptions about race and human value. Because public schools have such a powerful influence on how students understand science, educational institutions continue to play a major role in shaping public perceptions of genetics. This history makes the Board of Education a significant stakeholder in the issue of racism and genetic science. The institution has an interest in ensuring that modern curricula challenge misconceptions rather than reinforce them. By promoting accurate genetics education, schools can help students develop a more informed understanding of human diversity and reduce influence of ideas rooted in eugenic thinking. The Los Angeles Board of Education also has an interest in ensuring that students from all backgrounds have access to high-quality science education and opportunities to pursue careers in genetics and related scientific fields. Access to science education influences who participates in future scientific research and who holds positions of authority within those fields. Historically, barriers to educational opportunity have contributed to unequal representation within scientific institutions, limiting whose perspectives are included in research. Expanding access to science education helps create pathways for students from diverse backgrounds to contribute to genetics and medical research. This interest supports this documentary's thesis by highlighting how structural inequalities can continue to shape science even when explicit discrimination is no longer present. By increasing educational opportunities and encouraging broader participation in scientific fields, the Board of Education can help create a future scientific community that better reflects the diversity of Los Angeles and is less vulnerable to the biases that have influenced genetic science in the past. The history of racism in genetic science demonstrates that scientific knowledge is not automatically objective. Ensuring that genetics serves all communities fairly requires ongoing efforts in education, research, and public engagement. Throughout Los Angeles history, ideas about genetics have been used to shape how people understood race, heredity, and human value. From eugenic family life education programs in public schools to social Darwinist justifications for workplace inequality, scientific concepts were often influenced by the social and political beliefs of their time. Even today, disparities in scientific leadership and public misunderstandings about genetics demonstrate that the legacy of those ideas has not completely disappeared. The stakeholders examined in this documentary reveal that addressing racism in genetic science requires action across multiple institutions. UCLA CTSI works to promote inclusive and evidence-based research. The UCLA Brain Research Institute supports ethical and representative scientific inquiry. And the Los Angeles Board of Education plays a critical role in shaping how future generations understand genetics. Together, their efforts reflect a broader recognition that science does not exist apart from society. By learning from the past and actively challenging misconceptions, these institutions ensure that genetic science is used to expand opportunity, improve equity, and better serve the diverse communities of Los Angeles. Yet, the responsibility to challenge misconceptions does not belong to scientific and educational institutions alone. Because the way we understand genetics influences how we understand ourselves and others, individuals play a role in questioning their assumptions and biases. By challenging our beliefs, we can work towards a well-rounded understanding of humane genetics and heal the wounds created by decades of misconceptions.